Hi everyone, welcome to the Book Flow, where we bring books to life in fresh and exciting ways. Here are Sarah and John for a new dive. We use innovative digital tools to enhance our discussions, including AI-generated voices and analysis. We believe this innovative approach allows us to bring you fresh and exciting conversations about the books we love. We're excited to share it with you. Let's get started.
Ever feel like you're trying to completely change your life but end up stuck in those same old ruts?
Yeah, we've all been there.
Well, today we're going to dive into Atomic Habits by James Clear
Oh, I like this one.
to see if these tiny changes he talks about can really make a difference, like he says.
What's really interesting about this book is that it doesn't just tell you what to do. It actually gets into how habits actually work, like the science behind it, which I find fascinating.
And he throws in stories to keep you engaged too.
Right, which helps.
And it all starts with Clear's own story.
Yeah, his story's pretty wild.
Yeah, so picture this. A high school athlete, he's on track for a bright future.
Okay.
And bam, he's sidelined by this totally freak accident.
Oh no, what happened?
A rogue baseball bat to the face.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he ends up in a coma, shattered nose, multiple skull fractures.
Talk about a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
You'd totally understand if he just gave up on his athletic dreams right then and there.
Right. But that's not what happens.
Really?
He uses this system of, he calls them atomic habits.
Right.
Tiny changes, day after day.
Okay.
He graduates college and, get this, he's named an academic All-American.
Wow, that's incredible. He really turned things around.
It really shows you how powerful these small, 1% improvements can be if you stick with them every day,
Right. It's like that compound interest rate. It all adds up over time.
Exactly. And on the flip side, Clear says if you get 1% worse each day, you're left with basically nothing. It's scary to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Those small choices we make each day can really snowball for better or worse.
So even those little bad habits we all have can turn into major roadblocks if we let them.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect. It's about being aware of those small choices because they really do matter in the long run.
It reminds me of all the times I've set, those big, huge, crazy goals.
Yeah, we've all been there.
But I never thought about the systems I needed to actually achieve them.
Right.
The day-to-day. And Clear says, that's a recipe for disaster.
He is, yeah.
Is that what he means when he says, you fall to the level of your systems?
Yeah, that's it. He's saying goals are great for that finish line, like that one big thing you want to achieve,
Right.
But systems, those are the daily habits, the routines that actually get you to that goal day in and day out, whether you feel motivated or not.
So it's not about saying, I want to write a book.
Right.
It's about saying, I'm going to be the kind of person who sits down and writes consistently, even if it's just a page a day.
Now you're getting it. It's
Yeah.
not about that single achievement, like reading one book or going to the gym once.
Right.
It's about becoming the kind of person who prioritizes those things, who builds an identity around them.
So it's like, I'm not just checking off a task. I'm becoming a reader, a writer, an athlete, whatever it is I want to be.
Exactly. You're shaping your identity through your habits. And what's really interesting is that it works both ways.
How so?
Your habits shape who you are, but your identity also influences what habits you're drawn to.
Oh, that's interesting. It's kind of like a feedback loop.
It really is.
Okay, so we've talked about the power of atomic habits,
Yeah.
why systems are more important than goals.
Right.
But let's get into the practical stuff. How do habits actually work?
Mhm.
What's going on in our brains when we do something repeatedly and it becomes, automatic?
Clear breaks it down really well with what he calls the four-step habit loop. Cue, craving, response, reward.
Okay, so let's break that down. What's a cue?
So think of it like this. You're just going about your day and you see your phone light up with a notification. That's your cue.
Which then creates, a craving to check it.
Exactly. That craving is you anticipating something good, like satisfying your curiosity or getting that little hit of dopamine from seeing what the notification says.
Okay, that makes sense. So then the response would be actually checking the phone.
Exactly. You see the cue, you crave the reward, you respond by engaging in the behavior.
And then finally the reward. You find out what that notification was all about.
And it's often the anticipation of the reward, that dopamine hit, that's more powerful than the reward itself, which is why we often check our phones even when we know it's probably not going to be that exciting.
So true. It's like we're wired to chase that feeling. But how do we actually use this whole habit loop to our advantage?
Yeah.
How do we make good habits stick and ditch the bad ones?
This is where it gets really practical. Clear lays out these 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
Okay, so it's like a framework for actually changing our behavior.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start with that first law.
Yeah.
Make it obvious. So are we talking about those cues that start the whole habit loop?
You got it. The more obvious a cue is, the more likely it is to trigger your habit.
So if you want to make a habit stick, you need to make the cue super clear.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to do that is by using what Clear calls implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions.
Oh.
That sounds kind of intense.
It's really not. It's just about being super specific. So instead of saying, I'm going to meditate more, you'd say, after I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 5 minutes in my living room.
I get it. You're removing any guesswork by making a specific plan.
Right. You're basically telling your brain exactly what to do and when to do it. Another strategy is habit stacking.
Habit stacking. What's that?
So you take a new habit and link it to an existing one. So let's say you already brush your teeth every morning, right?
Yeah, hopefully everyone does.
So you could stack the habit of flossing on top of that.
So after I brush my teeth, I will floss.
Exactly. You're basically piggybacking on an existing habit so the new one feels less daunting.
That actually reminds me of that study where they rearranged the drinks in a cafeteria.
Right. They just moved the water to the front and more people chose it.
Yeah, it's amazing how much our environment influences our choices, often without us even realizing it.
Our brains love convenience, so make those good habits obvious and easy to access.
Okay, so we've talked about making good habits obvious. What about making them more attractive? That's the second law, right?
Yes, and this law taps into the power of dopamine.
Oh, dopamine, that feel-good neurotransmitter.
Exactly. The more appealing or enjoyable an activity is, the more likely it is to become a habit. Remember, your brain is wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain.
Makes sense. So how do we make those healthy habits, more pleasurable?
One effective strategy is called temptation bundling. You essentially link an activity you want to do with an activity you need to do.
So it's like rewarding yourself for doing something good. I like it.
Exactly. For example, let's say you love listening to podcasts, but you struggle to find the motivation to exercise.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, you could bundle those two activities together and only allow yourself to listen to your favorite podcast while you exercise.
So it's like I'm looking forward to the workout because I get to enjoy my favorite podcast at the same time.
Exactly. You're basically hacking your brain's reward system.
I like it. So we've got making it obvious, making it attractive. What about the third law, making it easy?
This one's all about reducing friction, minimizing the effort it takes to do the habit.
Because, let's face it, if something feels too hard, we're way less likely to do it.
Exactly. And we often set the bar too high, especially when we're first starting out.
So we got to make it super simple, especially at the beginning.
Exactly. That's where Clear's 2-minute rule comes in.
2-minute rule. Okay, tell me more about this.
It's simple, really. The idea is to break down any habit, no matter how big or scary, into a tiny version that takes less than 2 minutes to do.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. So instead of saying, I'm going to write a blog post, it's, I'm going to open a new document.
Exactly. You're not committing to writing the whole thing, just taking that first step.
So go for a run becomes put on my running shoes.
You got it. And the funny thing is, once you've taken that first step, often you'll just keep going.
Because you've already broken the inertia.
Exactly. It's way easier to keep rolling once you've started.
So forget about writing a whole chapter. Just try writing for 5 minutes, and then maybe 10.
You're basically tricking your brain into making progress without it even realizing it.
I like it. Okay, that's making those good habits seem a lot less intimidating. We've covered obvious, attractive, and easy. What about that fourth law? Making it satisfying.
This one's all about closing that habit loop, making sure you get that little reward or sense of satisfaction that makes you want to repeat the behavior.
Okay, yeah, because if it's not rewarding, what's the point?
Exactly. Our brains are wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, remember?
Right. It's basic human nature. But how do we actually make those good habits, especially the ones that take more effort, more, instantly gratifying?
Clear talks about using tools like habit trackers. Those things where you check off each day, you stick to your habit.
Oh, yeah, I love those. There's something so satisfying about seeing those little check marks add up.
Right. It gives you that visual reminder of your progress, which can be super motivating.
It's like giving yourself a little pat on the back for every small win.
Exactly. And those small wins add up to big results over time.
They really do. Okay, we've covered Clear's 4 laws for building good habits. Make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. But what about the bad habits? How do we get rid of those?
The same principles apply, just in reverse.
So make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, and make it unsatisfying.
You got it. So let's say you're trying to break a habit of mindless snacking.
Okay, I'm guilty of that one.
Well, first, you could try hiding those unhealthy snacks, putting them out of sight so you're not constantly tempted.
Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly. And then make those healthy snacks super accessible, like put a bowl of fruit on the counter where you'll see it.
So you're basically making the bad habit less appealing and the good habit more so.
Precisely. You're increasing the friction associated with the bad habit and decreasing it for the good habit.
It's like flipping the script. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about how our individual habits work, but Clear also talks about how our environment can influence our habits, right?
Absolutely. And he's not just talking about our physical environment, like our homes or workplaces, but also our social environment.
Well, that's interesting. So the people we surround ourselves with can actually impact our habit.
Big time. Clear talks about how we tend to pick up the habits of the people we spend the most time with.
Oh, like that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly. So if you're trying to build healthy habits, it's helpful to surround yourself with people who are already living that way.
Because we naturally start to mirror the behavior of those around us.
Exactly. We're social creatures. We're hardwired to fit in.
So it's not just about willpower or discipline. It's about being more strategic about who we spend our time with.
Precisely. And it's not about ditching your friends who aren't perfect. It's about being mindful of the influence they have on you and maybe seeking out some positive influences as well.
It's about creating a support system that aligns with your goals.
Exactly. And just like our social environment can influence our habits, our physical environment can too.
Right. We talked about that a bit with the cafeteria study, how something as simple as rearranging the drinks can impact people's choices.
And it's not just about food choices.
Yeah.
Our environment can impact all sorts of habits. Like, think about how much easier it is to work out if you have a home gym, or if your workout clothes are always laid out and ready to go.
Oh yeah, for sure. Or how much more likely you are to read if you have a cozy reading nook set up in your house.
Exactly. So if you're trying to build a new habit, take a look at your environment and see if there are any small changes you can make to support that habit.
So it's not just about changing our behavior, it's about changing our environment to support that change.
You got it. It's about setting yourself up for success.
I like it. Now, this might seem like a bit of a jump, but I'm curious about something. We've been talking about the power of our environment and how it can influence things like our food choices or our exercise habits. But can our environment really have that much of an impact on something as complex as, say, addiction?
That's a great question, and it might surprise you, but Clear actually talks about this in his book. He highlights this fascinating observation about Vietnam War veterans who used heroin while they were overseas.
Really? Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So a lot of these veterans, even though they were addicted to heroin in Vietnam, when they came home, they didn't relapse.
Wait, really? I would have thought that coming home after something as traumatic as war would be even more likely to trigger a relapse.
You'd think so, right? But researchers believe that a big part of what helped these veterans stay clean was the change in environment.
So being away from the context where the addiction started, like all the triggers and associations.
Exactly. It's like they were able to start fresh in a new environment.
That is fascinating. But it also makes you realize just how powerful our surroundings can be. Like, if our environment can have that much influence over something as strong as addiction, imagine the impact it has on our everyday habits.
Exactly. It's pretty powerful stuff. And it shows why it's so important to be intentional about the environments we create for ourselves.
It really makes you stop and think, you know, what if we could use that same power of environment to our advantage to make positive changes in our lives?
Exactly. It's about becoming architects of our own lives, designing spaces and surrounding ourselves with people that support the best versions of ourselves.
It's like setting ourselves up for success. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about how habits work, the 4 laws of behavior change, the power of our environment, even how to break bad habits. But there's one more thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up.
Okay, what's that?
It's something that really resonated with me when I was reading Atomic Habits. This idea that even when we have the best intentions, even with the perfect system in place, we're all going to face those moments of, like, boredom or lack of motivation, It's like, how do we stay motivated for the long haul, especially once that initial excitement of starting something new wears off?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We can't rely on willpower alone. Willpower is like a muscle. It gets tired.
So what's the secret? How do we stick with those good habits, even when we really don't feel like it.
Well, Clear talks about this idea called the Goldilocks rule. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, isn't that the one about, like, finding the sweet spot?
Exactly. It basically says that we're most motivated when we're working on tasks that are challenging enough to keep us engaged, but not so difficult that we get overwhelmed and want to give up. It's all about finding that Goldilocks zone, not too hard, not too easy, just right.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's about pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone, but not so far that we freak out.
Exactly. Think about it, those times when you've been totally absorbed in something, when you're really in the flow. Chances are you were working on something that stretched your abilities a bit but didn't make you want to pull your hair out.
It's like when you're learning a new skill, right? If it's too easy, you get bored. But if it's too hard, you just get frustrated. There's that sweet spot in the middle where you're like, okay, this is challenging, but I can do this.
Exactly. And that's the feeling we want to chase, that feeling of being challenged but capable. That's where the magic happens. And the key is to find that Goldilocks zone in all areas of our lives, whether it's our work, our relationships, our personal growth, anything.
It's about embracing those challenges, those growing pains, because that's where the real growth happens.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
And remember, even those people who seem like they have it all figured out, the ones who are at the top of their game, they still experience boredom. They still have days where they don't feel motivated. The difference is they've learned how to work through it.
It's like they've built that discipline, that system that allows them to show up consistently, even when they don't feel like it.
Exactly. It's not about waiting for the motivation to strike. It's about trusting the system and honoring the commitments we've made to ourselves, even when it's hard.
It's about playing the long game, understanding that those small, seemingly insignificant actions done consistently over time are what lead to extraordinary results. Wow, this has been such an awesome deep dive. Atomic Habits is such a great reminder that we don't have to make these huge, sweeping changes to see a difference in our lives.
Right. It's about those small, incremental improvements that add up over time.
It's about understanding how habits work and using that knowledge to our advantage.
Exactly. We have more power than we think to design the lives we want.
It's empowering. But here's a final thought to leave you with. We've talked a lot about building good habits. But what about those habits that we don't even realize we have? The ones that might be holding us back without us even knowing it. Those little automatic behaviors that we do every day without a second thought.
Yeah, those can be sneaky. It's easy to go through life on autopilot, just doing what we've always done.
Exactly. So take a moment to really pay attention to those autopilot actions. Maybe it's how you start your morning, how you react to stress, how you interact with your loved ones when you're feeling drained. What would happen if you brought those habits into your conscious awareness?
It's about asking yourself, is this behavior serving me? Is it aligned with the person I want to be?
It's about taking back control and making conscious choices about who we want to be and how we want to live our lives, one small habit at a time. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Atomic Habits. Hopefully you found some actionable insights and inspiration to start building those atomic habits that will lead to a happier, healthier, more fulfilling life.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to give it a like and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take on today's discussion. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. See you next time.